All right, everybody, we're here for PPL Live for Week 11. Week 10 is in the books. Not one of the better weeks in the league, as it was one of the lower scoring weeks of the season. But we're here for Week 11, and we have some promising matchups on the tilt. The very first matchup we're going to start with is Appease the Gods versus the United Players, the Destroyers. Well, ATG got big contributions from Robert Woods and Devin Funchess, the two wide receivers, who were basically guys that were brought in to supplement the main core of his roster. Woods went off for a career-high 36 and was unstoppable out there. The Houston Texans had no answers for Robert. And he's starting to look like a very solid receiver in the Rams offense. And it's starting to steal some of the shine from Sammy Watkins. Watkins better watch out there. It was a great play, and I think it's going to continue to be a good play throughout the season. Woods is a really good wide receiver and has a lot of skill. ATG did not fare well with Dak Prescott. Prescott was in for a big-time struggle. That was thanks mainly to Adrian Claiborne, who basically took over that matchup. It's a little concerning because that was the first game without Ezekiel Elliott in the lineup, and Dak Prescott didn't look like the guy. But I think that the more important injury or missing piece, at least in this equation, was Tyron Smith, the left tackle for Dak's blind side. It was not a fun week for him, and I'm sure they're hoping that they'll be able to do better against the Philadelphia defense. ATG was able to still put up a solid 116 despite the poor effort from a lot of his go-to guys. Gronkowski was pedestrian. Jordan Howard and Lamar Miller both, weren't of very much consequence either. So this should be a big bounce-back week for ATG after their, big-time showdown with the Argonauts. They should be looking to bounce back and get back on track. The New England coach also looks like a good play, being that they're looks like they're starting to catch their stride at the right time in the season. On the UP side, the loss last week puts them in position to play spoiler at this point of the year. Tom Brady had a pretty good game against the Broncos, but it just wasn't enough for the comeback. He should continue to play well. I believe the over-under for the Raiders Patriots game is at about 52, so that should probably be one of the higher scoring games this weekend. And Tom tends to, show up for games in the Bay Area because he is a Bay Area native. So I love the Tom Brady play this week. But ATG has Rob Gronkowski on the other side, waiting to offset some of the damage that can be done. Jimmy Graham, he's starting to catch on for the Seattle offense, which is a welcome development, especially for a guy like Russell Wilson, who a lot of times creates plays. It's not really that they are designed or that he has great receivers. It's that he creates the plays for his receivers to make. But for Jimmy Graham, he's a guy that can win those 50-50 balls, go up and catch, a high pass, and, kind of make the quarterback look good. So Jimmy's starting to fall in the line that should be able to help the UP. But the rest of the talent on this team is somewhat supplemental. I mean, I'm looking at guys like Tariq Cohen, Terrence Williams, Ted Ginn Jr., and Thomas Rawls. And while those plays at times, as evidenced by ATG's explosion last week, guys like that can make the difference. But at the same time, you don't really want to depend on those guys to be the difference in the matchup. That being said, looking at this matchup is pretty straightforward for me. ATG has a lot to play for. They're 7-3. They're tied for first place in the Omega Conference. And after last week's loss, they have to get back on track to keep pace for the Final Four. The UP is playing spoiler, but they don't look like a strong spoiler this week. A lot of these plays just aren't going to be of very much consequence. So that being said, I got Appease the Gods winning this matchup 125-107. Moving on to our next matchup, we go into the Alpha Conference as we have the Baby Gas team taking on Squad Underestimated. Two Alpha Conference rivals, both playing the role of spoiler this season, both coming off of big time wins over teams that were trying to make a playoff push. For the BGT, they're probably the best non-threatening team in the league. I mean, when you look at their lineup week to week, you probably can look and assume that you probably are going to lose. I'm looking at guys like Mark Ingram, who's been awesome this season because the Saints have gone to a run-heavy offense. Melvin Gordon, who has been great this year, although Eckler, the backup running back, is starting to take a little bit of his shine away. I'm loving Larry Fitzgerald this whole season. He's been so consistent and so clutch for the Cardinals, despite there being no other playmakers on that team. Larry Fitzgerald is showing why he's a Hall of Famer, and he's a guy that deserves mountains of respect. Doug Baldwin is also another guy who doesn't get the fanfare and the raving, but he's consistently Seattle's top receiver. He's consistently the guy making plays for Russell Wilson. And even last Thursday night, he didn't score on that play, but Russ was scrambling around and threw the ball up, and Baldwin made a spectacular catch and run. He's just a really good player and a really good piece to have going forward. The BGT, I mean, if they could have managed this team correctly, this is a legit Final Four team, or Final Four roster at the very least. But, bad plays at the bad time, poor decisions at some weeks on coaching and defense can cost you games you probably should have won. On the other side, I'm looking at Squad underestimated. Squad's starting to look like that team that he envisioned being. I was very impressed with the performance by Christian McCaffrey. He had 2 TDs in that comeback win over the Mean Machine, which was highly impressive comeback, especially considering that Graham Gano got in on it. And the Panthers coach, I mean, that was a great play. The Panthers were unstoppable on Monday night, so Squad deserves props for that. I'm looking around. Adam Thielen, I love this guy more and more every week I watch him. He's just consistent. I think guys underestimate him, and he's able to get by defenses. I think he had over 166 yards receiving last week. That's just disgusting. And he's not a guy that these defenses are prioritizing. They're thinking that Stephon Diggs is a threat, but they're starting to see that it's actually going to be Adam Thielen. So that's a great play for Squad. Dez gets to come back on Sunday Night Football in a primetime matchup, and then Chris Thompson against the New Orleans Saints. I think that's going to be a pretty high-scoring game. That being said, this should be probably one of the more entertaining matchups, even though neither of these teams have much to play for. Squad has the Seattle coach on Monday night. The BGT has Detroit at Chicago, so that's going to be a tough one. But looking around, this is one that, I mean, you can kind of flip a coin. But as I said earlier, the Baby Gas team in the end has the kind of team that could have been a Final Four team, especially if they made some of the right plays. I mean, you saw what Cam Newton did last week. This team has a bunch of tradable talent and a lot of potential, and they're the team to beat this week. I got the Baby Gas team winning this matchup 115-110. Moving on to our next matchup in the PPL, we have Patty's Twins taking on the Gaff Attack. Old school Omega Conference rivalry. The first 2 Omega Conference champions clashing in this one ahead of the playoff push. This matchup is just a grudge match. It's one that the Twins are going to try to win because they just want to ruin the Gaff Attack season. The Gaff Attack actually thought that they were able to keep the Twins out of the playoffs last year when they were in the situation of spoiler, and they got a late season win. That being said, I love this matchup just because it's always a fun one. The back and forth is pretty hilarious. For the Twins, Andy Dalton, it looks like he's going to draw the start at Denver. Andy's just not been the man anymore. I mean, he early in his career when he and AJ were establishing a rapport and they were making the playoffs, the Bengals were looking like an up-and-coming team. And Andy Dalton was looking like a guy who could be a dark horse MVP candidate. But as time went along, Andy just kind of never, grabbed the bull by the horn, so to speak, and became that guy. Jay Ajayi, I'm loving Jay Ajayi in Philly. I think that he's going to probably play a big game against the Dallas Cowboys in prime time. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a 20-point-plus game. So the Twins have some good plays at running back. Coleman and Ajayi are going to get a full workload this week. That should really help the Twins because they've been having a hard time finding guys who are getting a full workload. AB comes back on Thursday night. That should be pretty helpful. And Rashard Matthews is one of the Twins' favorites. He's going to be in the lineup this week. Deion Lewis gets to play, and the Steelers' defense is also a part of the Twins' lineup. The Twins' lineup actually is not bad this week. If they were playing someone else, I would probably think that they would have the advantage. But when you look at the Gaff probably at the moment has the best roster on paper. Kirk Cousins was benched last week for whatever reason, but put up a 30-point game. And I mean, that's the tough thing with Kirk, because, you know, sometimes you look at the matchup and you don't want to like it, and you don't really want to like him, but then he goes out and he runs for 2 touchdowns and throws another one and puts up 30 points and still loses. So Kirk is a guy who can he's a fantasy. He's probably just a fantasy quarterback. I mean, even in a real life game, he makes too many stupid mistakes and just is ineffectual at times. But on the fantasy side of things, because he's a stat patter, he's been able to be pretty productive. I'm loving Todd Gurley. There's really no change there. Todd's going to continue to run wild, as is Leonard Fournette at Cleveland. Even though Cleveland has a solid run defense, as the game goes along, Fournette is going to batter the Cleveland Browns, and he should probably have a big game, being that he was a little bit slowed down last week. I'm looking at DeAndre Hopkins. This is going to probably be the week that we really start to see the effects of Watson's injury. He's going to draw Patrick Peterson this week, a top cover corner, and I don't think Tom Savage is going to have the kind of confidence to go to Hopkins as he's had with these lesser corners playing against him these last few weeks. I like the Brandon Cooks play just because I think that Patriots Raiders game is going to be very high scoring and very exciting. And then Zach Ertz finally gets back in the lineup for the Gaff. He's one of the key pieces for the Gaff attack. If he plays well, typically the Gaff should probably win. Juju Smith-Schuster, a son of Troy, like his counterpart Robert Woods, and even to a lesser extent Marquise Lee, the sons of Troy, those wide receivers are making plays down the football field, and it's because of the speed. USC is known for speed. Juju Smith-Schuster is a speedster, and I'm loving him with Big Ben Roethlisberger, and I'm loving him across from Antonio Brown, because that's giving him the opportunity to go one-on-one with guys, and he's eating people's lunch. I'm loving Juju throughout for the rest of the season. I think that's a great pickup by the Gaff, and I think he's going to be a key part to a potential championship run for the Gaff. Jags defense is always going to be an automatic play. They've become like the Ravens D of old, or the Bears D of years back. They're just the best defense to have right now. And then obviously Zuerlein is the top kicker. That being said, I mean, there's really no reason to pick against the Gaff. Even though the Twins do have a few solid plays that I like, the Gaff has great plays pretty much across the board. That being said, I like the Gaff attack to win this matchup 131 to 115.